Hi, and thank you for joining us this afternoon. We're really happy and excited for this webinar, Shorten Your RPA Implementations. Ephesoft, in conjunction with UiPath, we're actually going to do something a little bit unique. So those who are looking to see a bit of a state of play and talk around RPA and data capture are in for a treat, as we're going to do a live build of what a process looks like in conjunction with Ephesoft and UiPath. So just to give you a bit of an overview of the agenda that we have today, I'll do a round of introductions of the speakers. We'll give you an idea about some of the housekeeping rules for the webinar, give you a bit of a short overview of the state of RPA and data capture projects. And then we'll go into the more exciting part around the capture and the live build of the respective technologies, utilizing the features of Ephesoft, as well as the functionality and capabilities of UiPath. So then there's an option for all of the attendees to ask a couple of Q&As towards the end of the webinar itself. So just in regards to introducing some of the speakers, I'm your host, Sean Doherty. I work as the Alliance and Channel Manager for Ephesoft here across Australia and New Zealand. With me is Chris Mahoney, the Solutions Architect for Ephesoft, as well as Daniel Melfer, the Pre-Sales Technical Consultant from UiPath, and Janetti Loris from the Pre-Sales Engineer for UiPath. Respectively, between them, they've got a wealth of knowledge and understanding of the capabilities of the respective solutions. So I'm really excited to see how they actually put this all together, and looking forward to some of the questions that you guys might have towards the end of this webinar. In regards to that, you'll notice that within the webinar screen itself, there's a chat box or a Q&A feature. Please, if there's any questions that come throughout the webinar, please don't hesitate to ask those. We'll give some ample opportunity to answer those questions in full towards the end. For all the attendees, they will remain on mute. And post-webinar, for those who've attended or signed up, all these slides and recordings will be actually sent to all those who have attended. So like I said, this is very much going to be a technical webinar. We're really going to go into the ins and outs of the respective solutions, really show you a lot of key functionalities, differentiators, and how we actually work in unison together. But to give a bit of an understanding, as we go into the fourth industrial revolution, this understanding of RPA, the understanding of data capture has become very much a prevalent conversation. And as you can see here, some of the stats around how we're actually utilizing these new tools that are available to us hasn't always been quite concise. 40% of RPA implementations never go beyond the pilot phase. We're looking at 50% of people saying that it's a lot harder to execute or deploy those bots. We're looking at data capture projects that add, project timelines and project blowouts within it. So all of these start to become, I guess, issues within a project being launched. And so what we really want to do today, what we really want to showcase with this webinar is how we actually change that. How do we actually improve these deployment times, start to see ROI, start to see value more so than anything else, quicker than anything else out there. So one of the key areas that we'll focus on, and this will be one of the solutions and processes that we'll automate today live for you, is around the accounts payable arena or the invoice processing. These stats here coming from last year's State of ePay 2018 Ardent Partners really showcases how much issue there still lies in that financial process. Whether it's the cost of the process and invoice, whether or not there's a massive amount of exception rates handling, the days to process an invoice, all of these start to really hamper an organization that wants to see scalability, that wants to see improvement, that wants to start to see actual return on investments when it comes to technology. Now, that's what happened. Those stats up there are those organizations who aren't utilizing technology to the full length. Hopefully with this, I believe with this webinar today, you'll see the value that we actually are able to bring. So at this point, I'd like to introduce Chris, who's going to talk about the overview and the capabilities of what Ephesoft's going to showcase and the information that we're going to be providing.
Excellent. Thank you, Sean. So look, today I'm going to be focusing on a ground-up demonstration. I'm going to explain two different document types that we're working with. I'll explain our particular process, how we may differ a little bit from other software providers. I'll show the framework for building and creating out in our solution. The two different document types I'm working with today are invoices and an application form. I'll be using a range of tools, so machine learning being one of them. I'll introduce enhanced machine learning and our very robust key value extraction.
Okay, and then from a UiPath perspective, what you'll see is a brief overview of components within UiPath Go. And these components in particular are UiPath Transact activities, which we will use within UiPath Robot and see how we can build that from ground up. And finally, we will show a process that's built from an end-to-end perspective.
Excellent. So look, here's a high-level overview of the process that we're going to be tackling today. Now, look, this is just a very, very high-level overview. It starts to show where Ephesoft sits within the particular process. So we could very simply use Ephesoft as the front end for the process. But in the case today, we're using UiPath to front end Ephesoft. And by that, it means UiPath will take documents, move those into Ephesoft for classification, extraction. And once that has taken place, we can then move it back to the bot where further processing can take place. So that's sort of a general high-level overview. And everything today is pretty much ground up. So leads us into the live demonstration. So please bear with me one moment and I will just jump out of this particular item here. I'll move across to my Azure environment. Great. Okay, so for those of you who haven't worked with Ephesoft, it's a completely web-based tool. It's available in Azure, AWS, on-prem, and there's a number of hosting options as well. The great part about working with UiPath is the integration is made rather easy. And you'll see this from Janady when it comes time to build the bot. Essentially, all I have to do is give him a URL and a username and login or password, sorry. And he can then start to send documents to Ephesoft Transact. I'm just going to jump in today and explain sort of from the bottom up. So we have a batch class here. I've kindly just created that already. A batch class is essentially a configuration. So that's what holds either one document type or multiple document types. You can use a number of different batch classes for different things. But in the case of today's exercise, we're just going to use the one. One of the other things I'd like to point out is the actual name of the batch class. So I've called it UiPath. That's another crucial piece for the integration. And you'll see that on the UiPath side of things. I've also enabled our machine learning category here, which is invoice. So that's going to handle our invoice processing fields that we're going to be working with today. So I'm going to fire off. Once I've opened up the batch class, I can start to create different document types. I'm going to create the classic invoice. And I'm also going to create another document type here, which was the application form. Okay, I'm going to pause here once I've created these two document types, and please excuse my typing. I'm not a professional typist, so I type a little bit slow. Okay, great. So if I move across, and I'll just show you this, the document types that we're working with, that's our application form. We're looking at capturing information such as the surname, first name, email address, and the current telephone number. And we've also got two different invoices here like so. Some of the key information we're looking for on those are things like the invoice date, invoice number, and also the total information. So now with knowing what we're looking for, we know that we're working with two different document types, one invoice, one application. I can go ahead and start to add different fields in this particular section. So for starters, I'm going to create an invoice number field. I'm going to specify a forced validation just so I can check the results prior to handing over to Janady. And that can also be controlled by using the OCR confidence. Okay, and I'm just going to continue to add a couple of fields in here. So we're going to add the date. Great. And I'm just going to put the total amount in this particular case. Excellent. Okay, so now with those fields created, essentially we're going to be capturing nothing at this point. It's not until I move over across to the machine learning fields, and you can see here we have a list of different types of out-of-the-box machine learning fields we can use. So I'm just going to pick the corresponding machine learning values. So we have invoice number, we have the date, and we also have the total. So I'm just going to finalize that now. I'm going to deploy that. One of the other things just to take note, as I'm starting to build these particular items out, I do have to start switching things on. So I'm going to switch on the out-of-the-box machine learning package for invoices. And I'm actually going to introduce our enhanced machine learning package as well. So that's excellent when you want to start making corrections on the fly. I'm just going to make sure that that's in there. And on our first pass, we can make those corrections, put those through again, and confirm that our corrections are absolutely correct. So that's sort of, in a nutshell, building out the document type and fields. I'm going to move across to the application side of things, and I'm going to put our first name, like so. I'm also going to put a forced validation in here so we can review it. I'm going to put our surname, email, and I'm also going to put our phone number. And I'm going to come back to this a little later, but firstly, we're going to put some documents into Transact, and we're going to watch what occurs. So moving across, we have a nice upload feature. Transact is essentially an omni-channel solution. So there's a number of ways that you can bring documents into our solution. This is just one of many methods. We do also offer email capture, folder capture, or we can use someone like UiPath to do a whole bunch of smarts prior to introducing documents into Transact. I'm going to go ahead. I'm going to select our 3 different documents. And these documents have never been seen by our solution. So we do need to provide a little bit of a baseline for what we're working with. I've uploaded those documents. I'm going to move across to more of a power user level, and that being the batch instance management. So a batch instance contains different documents and what's being extracted or classified with those documents. So we'll give it a few moments, and it should start proceeding through just checking the pages and trying to understand those documents. And I know that it's going to hit a review document phase because it doesn't know what type of documents. We haven't given it any kind of baseline at this point. So as I mentioned, we're ready for review. So I'm going to go ahead. I'm going to open up the review step. And you can see all the documents are unknown. So I can quite simply start to go, okay, that's an invoice. That's an application form. And that one there's an invoice. And the great part is, right at this point, I can start to learn these particular files. So I can say, okay, that's definitely an invoice. That's a format that I want to learn. And I'm only going to learn the first invoice here. I'm also going to learn the application form. So let me just learn that file very quickly. And you can see it says file safe for learning. And I'm not going to worry about the third invoice. It's going to automatically know on our second pass that that is an invoice. So I'm going to go ahead and just press review on that now. And it should now stop at validation. So I'm just going to double click that. And great, you can see that already we're starting to capture information with some of the out-of-the-box machine learning. As I assume, the application form was blank, and I did mention that we were going to revisit that at a later stage. And our other invoice starts to capture data. So I'm going to use the enhanced machine learning and correct the values, as you can see here. So simply, if I was to click sort of the OCR layer, as you can see here, it starts to show you without formatting all the available data that's within this document. And if I toggle back, you can see that there's the original document. So I've selected that invoice number. Simply, I could have grabbed any piece of data off this page. It's all made available through the OCR process. So you can see here by doing a right click, I can highlight the ship to if I really wanted to, or I can remove that value. I'm quite simply going to correct it to the right information and proceed. I'm going to go ahead here with the other invoice and I'm going to specify the date. So I'm going to right click and I'm going to highlight that date like so. And I'm going to leave the application form blank. So now with that, I'm just going to validate, and that should essentially finalize the process. Now we're not capturing all the data in this case, and that's where I start to move across to key value extraction. So by going back to the batch class management, where, you know, at an administrative level, opening up that batch class, focusing on the application form, I can start to give it a bit of a baseline on what to look for in that particular document. So if I go ahead and open up the first name field, I need to start providing some keys and values to start extracting that information. So for first name, it's rather simple. We're looking for the word first name. So by double clicking that, it should automatically pick up that particular identifier. If we just give it a moment, it shouldn't take too long. Excellent. And near enough, we're just going to look for that specific word there. So that being Sean, my wonderful colleague. I can do a quick test of that and it will show you there. There's the key, there's the value. It's rather simple. And we can start to add a couple of others in there. So I'll just go ahead very quickly and just add those in. I'm just going to tackle the surname very quickly. And this is actually a great tool when you have a range of different document types that you're working with. So very simply, you could look for a range of regular expression patterns in here, and you could match on those. And you'll see with things like the email address, it's actually rather intuitive where it will specify the regex up front. So there's very minimal coding required to start capturing data. So I'll move across to our email address like so. Highlight that specific area. And we can start to, and you'll see here when I click that particular email address, it starts to predefine the actual type of regular expression. So in this case, it is an email address like so. If I start to modify that, and I'll just clean this up a little bit. Oops, sorry, my apologies. And again, this is all live, so I do make mistakes. So you can see there that it starts to capture that email address like so. And the last piece that we want to look for is the phone number. So I'm just going to go ahead and finalize that piece. And we're not too far away from being complete here. So let me just finalize this now. I could put a very strict regex in there to say only give me 12 digits or 11 digits or however many that may be. I'm just going to use what's been requested there. And I'm just going to deploy that now. I'm going to go back to uploading a batch, and we're going to have a look at the results before I hand over to Junaidi over at UiPath, and he can start to show you his process. So we'll have a quick look at the batch instance management, and we may have to just wait for that to occur. So it shouldn't take too long here. So I think the key areas that we need to look for in this particular integration is the URL of my Transact server, the username and password, the batch class, the name of the batch class, and the bot is intelligent enough to start to work out what's actually coming out of each document type. So we're almost there. We've got ready for validation. I can go ahead and open up the validation. So you can see from the first pass, we actually missed that invoice number. So I did a little bit of machine learning there, a little bit of training. So the second time through, it's picked that value up. We're looking good there. This time around with the application form, we're starting to capture that data based off the key value extraction that I just applied. And the final invoice here is also picking up the invoice date. So with all of that, it's pretty much completed this very light configuration. And this gives me the opportunity to pass over to Junaidi, and he can show you how Transact and UiPath integrate together.
Stop sharing. Okay, so thank you, Chris. So what we've seen earlier is basically a batch class that was created from ground up, from zero, right? So what I'm going to introduce from our side, from UiPath perspective, is actually how do we build a bot from ground up as well by leveraging what Chris has built earlier. So in order to do that, let me introduce you quickly to UiPath Go. So you can go to this URL called go.uipath.com, and it's basically a marketplace for UiPath components. And this could be reusable workflows, custom activities, and a bunch of other things. So in particular, let me just look for Ephesoft. And what I'm after is Transact for Ephesoft. This is a custom activity that we have built from a UiPath perspective. So I've pre-downloaded this. So if you are able to just log in here and download, you will be able to see what I'm about to show you as well. So Transact for Ephesoft. So once you've downloaded it, as you can see under UiPath Studio, and this is, by the way, our IDE to develop robots. For those that are not familiar with UiPath, I have imported the UiPath Ephesoft activities like so. And what you're going to see under a list of activities on the left-hand side is under Ephesoft Transact, we have a list of 7 different activities, right? So the first one that we're definitely interested in is the Transact scope. This basically encapsulates all the integration with Ephesoft. So this is where you need to put in the server name, the username, and the password. And then for the breakdown, there are 2 different classification activities. The first one falls under the batch, and the first one, upload batch, is exactly the same as what Chris has shown you earlier within the Ephesoft Transact web application. You can upload a batch of documents. And then the other ones is gets all batch instances. This basically gives you a list of batches that matches a certain category, right? So I can go, give me all the batches that are in review for validation, for instance, or give me all the batches that are in error states. For the demonstration today, I'm going to be using a simple extraction, right? But let me quickly build a bot. And because a bot needs a source document, I'm not going to read my emails. I'm not going to read a folder. What I'm going to use basically is a select folder activity. So the first thing the bot's going to ask me is give me a folder. So I'm going to give it a folder of all those 3 documents that Chris has shown as part of his demo earlier. I'm going to create a new folder, new variable name called folder. And the folder that I'm going to be giving is basically this one, containing the exact same 3 demo application form and the 2 invoices that Chris has used as part of his demo. Now, for each of these, I'm going to integrate with Ephesoft Transact. So I'm going to drag around the Transact scope. So that's an activity Transact scope, and it needs 3 different properties on the right-hand side, right? Server address, which is the URL, username, and password. So I've got the URL to connect here. So I'm just going to give it a URL, server address, as well as a username. And with the password, I'm going to just do an easy password activity. I'm going to type in the password, and then create a new variable, just placeholder for the password. It already exists. Okay, so I'm just going to store that password within my Transact scope, and I'm going to use that in my activity. So that basically gives me a scope to connect to Transact. Now, what do I want to do here? I want to iterate through all the documents in that folder, right? So I'm just going to go quickly to directory.getFiles. And I'm giving it a folder name. So what I'm telling this piece of code here is for each of the file in that directory, and the file name is a string, I want to give this to Ephesoft Transact. So the activity that I'm using is multi-page extraction. So this will allow Ephesoft to process multi-pages document. And here, as you can see, on the right-hand side, there is an input and an output arguments or variables or properties. The important thing here is batch class, as Chris has mentioned. So let's quickly have a look at the batch class that he has created. So that's the batch class name that he has used, called UiPath. So that's exactly the name that we're going to use as well. And then this is the file that it needs, right? So instead of hard coding a file, I'm just going to use the item. So an item will contain the path of a file. And the output reference is basically a code. So this is a string code that Ephesoft will give us. And then I'll need to use the get extraction results in association with that. So let me drag across the get extraction result activity and pass that reference code. And then the output of that then is an array of Ephesoft documents. Now this is an object that we can then interrogate in terms of what are the document type, what are the fields that you've got, and what are the line items, anything that Ephesoft will provide, right? So I'm just going to give it a placeholder, a variable, again called array of Ephesoft document. Okay, now I've got this array of Ephesoft documents. Once these 2 activities is complete, for the demonstration purpose, what I'm going to do is I'm going to iterate through those return results from Ephesoft document, like so. And for each of these items, because this is an array of Ephesoft document, what I need here is an Ephesoft document object. Right, so I'm just going to browse for this type, select it for each of these type. Now I know that it is an Ephesoft document. What do I want to do with this? Again, for the demonstration purpose, I'm not going to write this data or information anywhere else. I'm just going to print it out, and then we can have a look at what we've got from the batch class that we have just built earlier. So first thing first, I do a doc dot, and these are a list of different information that Ephesoft document will provide us, right? So I want to first have a look at the type. So this will give me either an invoice or an application, right? Exactly what the document type that has been defined within the Ephesoft Transact platform. And from here, I have a list of fields. So these are the fields like first name, short, last name, phone number, and email that has been created for the application, and some invoice headers as well. So I'm going to go back to, again, for each loop, I'm going to iterate through each of these field lists. So if I go fields, doc.fields, you can see that this is basically a list of fields, Ephesoft fields. So I'm going to rename that to field and change that object type to Ephesoft field. Okay, so at this point, what I'm trying to print right now, if I'm just going to do another quick write line, Now, what we have access to here is fields, and this will give me an individual field. So if I do a dot, again, what you see is confidence, right? OCR confidence, how confident Transact is with regards to that extracting that value. We have a name, which is the field name. So I'm going to print that just to see if we got the right field. And then I'm going to extract the dot value. Right, so we've got a name and a value. Just notice that we've got other types as well. So we can see if this is an integer, is it a string, is it an email, different types that you can, again, extract it from Ephesoft Transact. So for this demonstration, I'm just going to print the name and the value just to see that we can identify correctly the document type as well as all the fields that are already configured within Transact. So that's it. So I've got a folder. I'm connecting to Transact, and for each of those files in that folder, I'm calling two core activity. So this is the brain that talks to Ephesoft, and this return results by Ephesoft. For this purpose, I'm just printing those values out. Let's have a look at this. So I'm running it this point, and behind the scene, it's going to ask me for a folder, right? So I'm just going to give it a path to this webinar folder under my desktop, like so. And what's happening in the background for each of the files is going to send it to Ephesoft Transact. And as you can see, the first item, you can see the document type, you can see the 3 different fields, exactly the same as what you've seen earlier within the validation screen. You can see the second ones came through, application type, first name, last name, email, and phone number, and finally, the last one. And that's it. So it took about 30 seconds, and majority of them is processing within Ephesoft Transact. So that's it. That's a pretty straightforward way of building a bot from ground up, connecting to Ephesoft Transact, and you can extract all the fields and the values from Transact. And with that, I hand over to Daniel to talk to you through the next part.
Hello, everyone. Thanks, Junaidi. Thanks, Chris. I'm just going to share my screen. All right, so what I'm going to demonstrate to you is how do you put together all the pieces of that puzzle. So Chris went through the process of defining a document classification process within Ephesoft. He went through the process of extracting data using Ephesoft as well. Junaidi just demonstrate how easy you can integrate one platform to the other. And in the end, this is what you get. So what you are seeing on my screen, it's a workflow. It's with some business logics that basically we are using UiPath as the front end of the solution. And what this workflow does, it's checking my emails. I'll show it to you in a second. It's downloading attachments if there are attachments. If there are no attachments, but if suppliers or users, if they're actually sharing files with you using some kind of like online sharing file system, very commonly people share files using Google Drive, OneDrive. There's a number of like platforms that people can use to share files. Yeah, I'm using the bot to identify a link. If there is a link on the email, then UiPath is going to connect to Ephesoft using HTTPS. All the information is securely encrypted. Now, as you can see in this workflow map, right in the middle of my workflow, I've got all the logic that Junaidi just went through, and he just demonstrated how easy it was to drag and drop all the Ephesoft activities inside a UiPath robotic workflow. And this is what you can see on my screen on the left-hand side. On the right-hand side, that's what Junaidi just explained. Now, next, Ephesoft is going to return back telling me this document is an application, or if this document is an invoice, and then the bot, based on that classification and based on the type of documents Ephesoft is returning back to me, the bot's going to execute one thing or the other. Now, for this demonstration, I've got 2 types of documents, invoices and a health application form. In reality, in your production environment, we could be dealing with dozens and dozens of different document types. Now, what is the bot going to do? You can see on my screen, I've got my Outlook. Now, this is running on my computer. Of course, in your production environment, I wouldn't be integrating with Outlook. I would be integrating with Exchange or your mailbox. I could be extracting data from FTP sites, web devs, or anything. Now, the interesting thing here is, as you can see on my first email, I don't actually have any attachments. I've got a link, a URL that takes me to SharePoint, and that supplier is providing to me his invoices by sharing it using OneDrive SharePoint. So this type of requirement would be relatively tricky for you to accomplish using Ephesoft alone. So we're actually using the bot to get that file from you. My next attachment, my next email, I actually do have an attachment. As you can see, it's an application form. This one is a little bit more straightforward. The bot can very easily get it out of the email, but the email with the URL is slightly more tricky. Now, I'm just going to click on this email, on this link, and show to you what do I have under that link. So basically, I've got a SharePoint OneDrive site. I've got a long file. I think that PDF has 11 pages. And within those 11 pages, I've got 5 or 6 different invoices. And what Ephesoft is going to do, Ephesoft has the smarts and the logic to look at the structure of the invoice, the format, the header, the footer of the invoices, and it will smartly, automatically split that PDF into the correct number of invoices. Same thing for applications. If I had multiple applications in a form, Ephesoft would split it and return back to UiPath the correct values out of it. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to mark those 2 emails as unread. So when my bot runs, it knows what do I want to extract. Now, and the bot is going to execute this workflow. Now, just to make things clear for everyone, in this instance, I'm running everything out of my computer. In a production environment, this would be running on a VM, on a server. It could be running on your private cloud, such as Azure or AWS or whatever cloud environment you have. But for today's, I've got the bot running out of my laptop. So I'm going to minimize this. Okay, I've got a UiPath robot running here out of my system tray, and you can see that I have one workflow available to me. This workflow is the workflow that I had on my screen just before. So I'm gonna hit the start button, and the bot's gonna be running continuously for as long as I want, monitoring my email for new upcoming invoices and applications. So I'm going to hit start. So what's happening right now, the bot's going through my Outlook. Again, in a production environment, it would probably be an Exchange server or something similar. It's extracting the information. It found a URL, a link to SharePoint. So the bot's navigating by itself to SharePoint. I'm not touching the computer. The bot's actually going there. It knows there's one file waiting to be downloaded. You can see the bot ticking the button. It's going to hit the download button. You can see the Windows Explorer prompt coming up. The bot's going to save that file into a temporary location. Now I'm going to close this browser. I don't need it open. And if I go back to my bot, to my robot tray, you can see the bot's processing those files. Now, what the bot is doing right now, it's communicating with the Ephesoft cloud using HTTPS. All the data transmission back and forth is fully encrypted. Now, I've got 11 pages to process, about 5 or 6 invoices. So on average, it will be about 10 seconds, maybe 12 seconds per invoice. Now, on a server, it would be a little bit faster, but on my computer, it takes a little bit longer. So if you just bear with me for about like 60 seconds or so, what you're going to see, my bot is going to receive all the information that has been smartly captured by Ephesoft. It's going to pop up a dummy ERP solution. Now, in your case, it could be SAP, it could be Oracle, it could be Xero or anything, and it's going to navigate to that. And this is what's happening right now. The bot received the header fields, the line items. This is happening very fast. I hope you can see it. Now, I had to slow it down by 300% because in reality, when I run this on my computer, it goes so fast, you wouldn't be able to see anything. So I deliberately slowed it by 300%. So we are going through the 4th invoice. I think after this one, there's one more. And there you go. So as easy as that, I got all the information from Ephesoft, invoice number, date, total, GST, tax, line items, quantities, whatever field you want, and it outputted, export the information into this mock-up of an ERP system. Again, in your case, it could be PeopleSoft, it could be Oracle, it could be like an API, it could be any endpoint that you want. Now, what's going to happen? The bot is still running on my computer. It's going to be running there for as long as I want. I mean, again, this is my laptop in a production environment. It would be running on a server. And what I get in the end, if I go to my notifications, as you remember, I had invoices and I had an application. So the invoices, you just saw all the data being output into that web ERP mockup. For the application, the bot's telling me, look, I have received your application. I extracted the email information, which in this case, it was me, Daniel Melfa. And the bot's telling me, thanks for your application. The bot, we will process your application as soon as we can. Beyond this point, I mean, we could do anything with that application, extract information, type the information into a CRM, into a supplier customer portal, whatever you want it to be. So this just goes to show how very quickly, in a matter of like hours or even minutes sometimes, you can integrate our UiPath RPA platform to your Ephesoft, or vice versa. If you already have Ephesoft and if you're trying to explore the use cases, like you can actually, by getting the best of those two technologies, you can vastly expand the use cases of what you can achieve by using RPA and the Ephesoft smart document capture and classification technologies. All right, and this bot, it probably took us a couple of hours to put it together, so it's very easy for you guys to get started if you like. Now, this concludes the demonstration of my bot. I'm going to hand it over back to Sean, and Sean is going to, we are going to answer any questions that you guys might have. So with this, thanks, and I'll hand it over to Sean now.
Sorry about the delay there, guys. We're just going to pull up the Q&A slide. Look, I hope the audience were able to see something that is not normally done in a webinar. You don't often actually see two solutions from the ground floor up actually take some raw, unused, unseen, and untethered data before and actually get the solutions live in a demonstration applied to the capability. So I thought it was absolutely fantastic to see. I mean, what we were able to actually, I guess, to see on this particular webinar was the functionality of two pretty brilliant solutions, two brilliant companies using some of the technology that's going to be the future. It's going to be the norm for a lot of organizations. And the other thing that can't be undervalued was how quickly this was done. You know, we looked at two applications, two documents with Ephesoft. We were able to grab a number of different bits of information, and we were able to actually extract that and then apply that into a downstream process. So we're actually able to see what results we actually start to get from it. So one of the questions I want to ask to Daniel, and if Daniel could, I guess, use his knowledge about all the processes he's been involved with, but outside of accounts payable and invoice processing, what are the other, I guess, common solutions or common processes that you actually see?
Hey, Sean. So outside of the accounts payable processes, now very commonly, I've seen a lot of like supply chain processes where we need to extract data out of airway bills, seaway bills, consignment freights, like notes, invoices. Now, very commonly as well, different types of applications, application for mortgage, applications for loan from banks. It might sound like a little bit surprising, but PDF forms and paper forms are still quite widely used. And yes, so supply chain, employee onboarding, vendor onboarding processes, they are all very form heavy and good use cases for OCR together with RPA.
Yeah, thanks for that, Daniel. I mean, I think what the audience there can pick up on is that a lot of the processes that we tackle here are very manually intensive. They've got a lot of information on those pages that we need to be able to grab. They've got a lot of critical information for businesses to make decisions. So I guess the question that we had, and there's a couple of questions that have come through here. So for the first one, Lance Smith's here. For an invoice robot, how much time typically does a project take? And I might refer back to Daniel again to answer that question.
Okay, Sean. So that question is usually the first or the second question that always comes up when we go and we're talking to a new customer. Now, it's a little bit of how long is a piece of string, but I'll provide some like averages. Now, for a simple invoices project, where you're just trying to identify the supplier, read the ABN information, validate ABN, get your PO, your invoice, your date, total, your tax amounts. Usually those processes could go anywhere between probably like 3 to 4 weeks. Now, sometimes AP processes can get complicated a little bit more, like you have to extract line items, product codes. Quite often you have to translate product codes, get descriptions, text, units, and so forth. Those processes where line items are involved and you have to do two-way matching or even three-way matching against POs and delivery dockets, they could go anywhere from like 6 to 8 weeks. But I mean, again, it really comes down to your business rules. I mean, as an starting point, like header only 4 weeks, 8 weeks with line items. But again, take this with a grain of salt. It really comes down to your business rules of how you validate your data.
Yeah, thanks for that, Daniel. Look, another pertinent question that comes up quite often, and this is coming from Matt Dunn, how does your pricing work? What is the cost per document to process through Ephesoft? Look, when we first engage with a lot of organizations, this invariably is a question that comes up. Unlike a lot of other organizations, Ephesoft relies on core processing power with unlimited page use and unlimited users. So where you start to look at scalability for projects, where you start to look at, I guess, honing the Transact capabilities on more than one process, you start to see that Ephesoft becomes a really viable choice when it comes to applying it along with the uses of UiPath or into your ERP system. To go a little bit more specific into that would be another conversation for another day, because there are parameters around the processes that you want to do, the fields you want to extract, and information that we need to understand beyond that. But suffice to say, we don't worry about page count and we don't worry about end user count with it. I want to go to another question, which I'll refer to Chris Mahoney on this one. What happens if the value, and this is coming from Parashit, what happens if the value from the source invoice is read incorrectly? How do we ensure the correct numbers are posted into the target system?
So excellent question. That was something that I did touch on during that demonstration. So we do have the ability to, at a user level or sort of AP clerk level, have the ability to, based on confidence, show a particular document and where a particular error may have occurred. And then by either clicking the corresponding value and or right-clicking and selecting the value, you should be able to correct that value. If it was based on the fact that the document was of very poor quality, the user or the AP clerk could very easily just type that in also. So there's a number of different options there. And again, the question's very good, although there are a lot of variables in this case in regards to sort of quality of the document. Another sort of key area that I do want to touch on in that regard is one of the industry trends that we're starting to see is an e-text layer. So PDFs that are being generated by systems like MYOB and other ERP platforms are providing their documents with an e-text layer. And this is fantastic because we're not actually OCRing those documents. What we're doing is up front, when the document arrives, we determine whether it has an e-text layer or not. And if it does, we read that. So we actually get a higher accuracy in that regard. And then for traditional OCR, look, there are generally minor challenges when the quality does get a little bit bad.
Yeah, thank you for that, Chris. And
Yeah,
I hope that answered the question there for you, Parashit. Look, we've got another question here as well. Can Ephesoft read the handwritten documents as well? This is, I'll be honest, and I'll open this question up with, it's almost like a holy grail, but then I'll refer to Chris here again to answer this in a little bit more context.
So in regards to handwritten documents?
Yes.
So yes, we do. We do cater for handwritten documents also, but more in a fixed form nature. So it would be more around application forms, census forms, things like that. We have been experimenting and we're trying to, at this current point, determine where the market sits with handwriting. We've had sort of
mixed feedback from the market, where handwriting is a big part of their business. But we are finding in a lot of cases, handwriting makes up about 8 to 10% of someone's business. So, you know, it's a tricky one. If it's a specific need, like an application form, then it's not overly difficult to configure that.
Yeah, thank you, Chris. So look, just to kind of follow up on a couple more questions here from Prajit, you know, thank you for your response, but how do you handle incorrect values in runtime? So I'm going to assume here, Prajit, that when we OCR a particular document, or there's some information that is wrong on that document, we've got what we would deem as an exception. Now, there's two things that we can do here. Articulating it as an exception, we can push it off into UiPath for it to do further downstream processing and understand exactly where the errors are going there. Or in Ephesoft, we can actually raise that in the validation screen where Chris was working on a couple of occasions, and we're going to have someone correct that information based on what they understand or what they've contextualized with that data. So that's probably, those are the two ways, just simplistically, how we can actually move this forward here. So we've got a couple more questions that we would like to get through here. Matt asking again, do we offer up a demo version for our clients to try before they buy? Look, we typically engage the clients in opportunities in a way where we build that value, when they can see their information, their documents going through Ephesoft, going into UiPath, and they can see the true value that comes through it. Now, do we go into a full depth POC? Look, depending on the engagement, depends what we have. But we don't really have a trial license that we release out to the public. Any further questions after that, Matt? Once we've sent out the information, I'd ask you to refer back to us and we can have a bit more of an in-depth discussion there offline. One last question here, coming from Bindu. I'm not sure if you covered machine learning earlier. Can you talk to us about the capabilities to interpret document content, say legal applications, forms like that? Chris?
Great question. So look, I did touch on some light machine learning capabilities earlier. So that was more in regards to the invoice processing side of things. I also enabled our enhanced machine learning. I think maybe what you're referring to here is potentially NLP, or like an interpretation of the actual content, or contextualizing the content of a document. So that's how I kind of interpret the question. So for instance, if it was a legal document, it potentially could be a contract. So there would be words that were specific and pertinent to a specific legal contract. So look, we would probably look at a number of ways to do this. There is, and again, you've got a very, very small snapshot of some of the tools available in Ephesoft. But in regards to sort of contextualizing data, very simply, if it was a contract, we could utilize different sort of NLP services to determine what that document, the contents of that document is, and what the context of that document is. I think similarly too, even if we were to extract some pertinent information out of, say, a legal document, we could pass that across to UiPath. They could even do a very similar thing where they could utilize some type of NLP service in order to determine the context of the document. Would you say that's correct, Daniel?
Absolutely correct, Chris.
Yeah.
So with UiPath, we can actually connect, like use cognitive services from Google, from Microsoft, from AWS, and by combining those cognitive capabilities of those three platforms together with Ephesoft document classification capability, we can fairly confidently determine what kind of document we're looking at, and if required, extract key pieces of information according to the document type.
Absolutely, absolutely, yeah. Look, there's been other instances of that too. Things like signature detection. So doing that up front, so using Ephesoft to determine if a signature is present on a document, and taking it even further, cutting out that signature and potentially sending that off to a signature repository just to ensure that the signature is correct. So there's lots of different areas within both solutions where you can start to explore a lot of these capabilities and potential problem solvers.
Yeah, I completely agree, Chris. I think for most of the challenges, we don't have like a single silver bullet for each problem, but by combining the best of breed capabilities of both applications, we can usually deliver like a positive outcome and get to fulfill the requirements.
Yeah, fantastic. Look, I really appreciate the responses there, Chris Mahoney and Daniel Melfa. Look, to the audience, there were some fantastic questions that you guys asked. I do hope you guys all got some capabilities, learned something new, or saw the power of the combination of UiPath and Ephesoft together to see how quick and easy it actually is. Look, we are coming up close to time. We will be having a recording of this email sent out to everyone post-webinar. So over the next 24, 48 hours, you should see some information along with the slides and the recording in your inbox. If there's going to be any further questions, we will be reaching out to attendees and those who came along, just to see if there's assistance we can provide and further information. So I appreciate you. If you have any more questions, we'll answer those. And again, I appreciate everyone's attendance today. I appreciate the panelists and the time that they've given to showcase the capabilities of Ephesoft Transact and the UiPath bot. And look, I appreciate all the time and have a good day. Thank you.